Hi, Mrs. H Psychology. So this is for AQA. It is paper 1 memory, and this time it is another theory of forgetting, so retrieval failure, where we have a lack of cues, so sometimes known as cue dependent forgetting or retrieval failure. Okay, and the filing cabinet is important here. Why do you think that might be? This sort of image of a filing cabinet. Have a little think about why that's relevant. Okay, so let's go through what we need. Memories can't be retrieved because the correct retrieval cues are not there. So the idea here is that memories still exist, but they're forgotten because you can't access them. Okay, hence this image. So it's like the memories still exist, but you don't know where they are in the folder, and you need the cues, something to trigger a memory about where you're meant to find them. So here similarity is important because similarity will help retrieval with cue dependent forgetting or retrieval failure. So we need to use similarity. We also need here cues act as a trigger to help recall. Two different types of cue dependent forgetting, split into context and state. Okay, so let's look at context first of all. Recall is helped by the same place, the same context where they happened. So this relies on external cues. So this is based on the environment. Okay, so if you try to include those key terms, right, it's about being in the same place, and it's therefore about external cues and based on the environment. So we've got a piece of research from Smith. Smith was using student participants trying to recall lists information, learnt items, and either tested in the same room which had learnt them or a different room. And he found that they had better recall when they were tested in the same context where they learnt the information. He even found it improved recall when the students were able to imagine themselves back in that learning room. Obviously, that has massive practical applications. Who for? Have a think about that. Obviously, it's going to be your students, you guys, because if you can't actually be in the exam hall, you've got to try and remember where you were when you learnt the material, so cast your mind back to the lesson. Obviously, also, police interviews, the cognitive interview. They try and take them recall the same state that they're in. It's the same physical, emotional state, but also taking them back to the scene of the crime. So practical applications there. Another piece of research, Godden and Badley, quite a famous one. Participants in this case were all deep sea divers. It was an independent groups designed with 4 conditions. They were learning lists of words either on land or underwater, and recalling on land or underwater. So 4 different scenarios there. Okay, so recalling either in the same place or a different context. So they learnt on land and recalled on land, or learnt on land and recalled underwater, and so on and so forth. Results: when their recall was different in a different context, recall was 40% lower than when they recalled in the same context. That was regardless of whether they learnt on water or learnt underwater. Okay, we also have state dependent forgetting. So that is basically our physical and emotional state also plays a part in our forgetting. So we often remember events when we're in a similar state as we were when we experienced them. So these are about internal cues, and it is split into physical state and emotional state. Okay, so pieces of research to support this. We've got Overton, again 4 conditions. Participants in this case learnt material drunk or sober and recalled in the same or different physical state. And he found that the recall was best in the same state as their learning, and that counted even with drunken state. Darley was the same, but this time with participants who had hidden money whilst they were high on cannabis, and again finding that they could recall when they were back high on cannabis again. So the same has been found with emotional state. For example, clinical case studies, example being Williams, with a young man with bipolar disorder who had similarly hidden money in a manic episode, couldn't recall it when he was actually more stable, but when he then had his next manic episode, he could quite easily remember where he'd hidden his money. Okay, evaluating it. Well, we've got practical applications. So, for example, students could benefit from this, and you could develop that. Cognitive interview technique, develop that. The context reinstatement aspect of the cognitive interview. And that has, if you look back at your evidence to support that, there's plenty of evidence to support the fact that that can help recall. Plenty of empirical objective research also for showing the effects of cue-dependent forgetting, and therefore that increases the reliability of the theory and gives it scientific credibility. We also have plenty of everyday examples. When you go upstairs, you think, oh, what have I come upstairs for? I can't remember. You go back downstairs to the same place where you thought about it and you can remember it, what you went upstairs for. However, Gordon and Badley also tried out a recognition test instead of a cued recall test, and they found no effects of the same state recall. So it does limit this cue-dependent forgetting as an explanation, because it doesn't seem to have an effect on recognition tests, so it does limit it a bit. Also, there are alternative explanations like interference theory, and plenty of evidence to support interference theory. We also could bring in the artificiality to some of this research. So, for example, learning lists of words. Gordon and Badley, the deep sea divers, not very relevant to their task. Therefore, it is artificial, and therefore it would lack validity, ecological validity, mundane realism, and therefore we're limited in generalizing it. And also, when research involves procedural memory, so for example, procedural things like riding a bike, memory doesn't seem to be affected by state-dependent failure, cue-dependent forgetting. So it cannot be the only explanation.